Justifying back with another tutorial. In my last video, I posted, what is phasing and what is phase correlation. This is part 2 to that video. I decided to break this up into segments and kind of like go into how I mix, my beats, from gain staging, frequency separation, that whole thing. But I'm just going to do a series. So this is part 2. Last video we covered what is phasing. In this video we're going to cover what is phase correlation. Essentially, phase correlation is it can be thought of it displays the changing of phase relationship between your left and the right channels of a stereo signal. But to simplify it, it can be thought of as indicating the state of a stereo signal in its mono compatibility. And the reason why I wanted to break it up and separate what is phasing and what is phase correlation. At the end of the last video, I kind of talked about how we listen to our how we listen to our music in today's society, through laptops, through cell phones, and that being mono. So when you mixing, you essentially you want to make sure that your mix translates the same way it did in stereo as it did over into mono. And here's a track that I made, I want to say back in maybe 2017, and I didn't understand exactly what was going on. And to me, a lot of things sound like like it was heavy reverb. And often I see a lot of producers and even sound designers, they throw a bunch of reverb and they throw plugins that widen the sound. Essentially, that's the thing that is hurting the mix. When that sound goes outside of that stereo perimeter, that's when you begin having phasing issues. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with these pads. This sound in particular, I know that the sound was really wide and outside of the stereo, that parameter. It was causing a lot of phasing issues. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up this instance of Isotope stereo imager. They have a vector scope, and here you have your phase correlation meter. I don't know, and I try to stay in the plus. I know that when you're in the minus, that's when you have these issues. They have means of correcting it by offsetting your frequency bands. What I typically would do, well, I'm gonna just let you listen to it and just pay attention to what's in the vector scope and what's in the phase correlation meter. Now you notice how wide the sound is, and it's just bouncing back and forth from being negative to positive. So in translation, when you're listening to it in stereo, ultimately it'll sound good, but when you go listen to it on one of these mono devices, it's going to sound horrible. So what I would do is I would go through and do frequency separation. Pretty much, I will pull up an EQ, and anything that registers on the low end that I'm typically going to filter out anyway, I would go in that frequency, and I would kind of make it more mono. Some plugins that you could use in Logic that are stock, you can go into metering and go down to your correlation meter, or you can go to your multimeter. The thing with the multimeter, you will have to switch it from analyzer over to your ganometer, and when you switch over to your ganometer, it'll show you. I'm sorry, the ganometer shows. So this shows what your EQ was showing. Your ganometer shows how much the stereo space, in the mid, where it's at in the left, where it's at in the right. So if you notice that it's doing the same thing, it's bouncing all the way on the left side. That's where you don't want to go. So ways that I would correct that is I use two plugins. I use obviously Isotope stereo imaging, and I also use a plugin made by Brainworks under Plugin Alliance. They have a stereo width knob right here. If you look, they got a mono section where if you make adjustments, this adjusts the frequency within the mono section, and you make adjustments to the stereo section on this side. So what I would do is, I would isolate those frequency bands, those unwanted areas, and kind of make those more of a mono signal, and then try to control. I don't want to take too much of the stereo, because I want the sound to be wide. I just don't want it to be wide to where it's though it's not going to translate when I switch over to mono. So I'm gonna go ahead and now I'm going to enable both plugins. I'm going to turn this off because it's not needed. And take that out of bypass, and now listen to it, and then look at your vector scope and your phase correlation meter, and you'll see how drastic those little changes made. So here we still have, the width that we're that we want, but the problem was corrected because we're now staying in the positive. So when we go and we open up an instance of gain, and right now I got the mono one on, so if I was to turn that off and switch between the two, I lost a little bit of my stereo space, but ultimately the sound and the quality of it was not diminished, because I controlled it in the beginning. So these things can be implemented. I don't claim to be any expert. I mean, this is just something that I learned within the last, I want to say, 2 months, and I went back on a lot of my old beats and went through and saw what sounds were phasing, what sounds were giving me a negative as far as on a phase correlation meter, and I started addressing and correcting those things, and my mixes turned out way better than they initially were, where I went back and redid the beat and kind of like took an old beat. Like I said, this beat was from 2017, and I went back and made some adjustments and tweaked it. Now I can re-release this same beat for and it's just as suitable as it was 3 years ago as it is today. So I hope that this makes sense. I mean, it makes sense to me, but I don't know, if this is something that you guys would like for me to continue, and this is helpful. I have no problem explaining, these things based on my knowledge and my understanding of them. If it's something that I said that was, wasn't along the lines of, the technical terms or, something along those lines, feel free to drop a comment and explain that, because as a community, I'm not a expert at this. I'm just explaining based on my knowledge and understanding of it. Share it in the comments. As a community, I have no problem giving out any information. I look for this information, that way I can implement it into my own, my own instrumentations, and if they help me, I hope that it helps you. We can, piggyback and continue to support one another. But I'm gonna play this beat and let you guys hear what it sounds like. Let me know what you think about it. thing crashed. So that is funny. But I'm gonna wrap this because it's just, I know it's gonna crash. Yeah. Hopefully you've learned something. Feel free to like, share. I appreciate you for making it this far into the video. Yeah, if you're not a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. It helps the channel out tremendously. Remember, if it sounds good, it is good. Peace.